Bittersweet one for me today, guys. What is going on? It's your boy Tommy on the spot for Watch Along Wrestling. Hopefully everyone is doing well and staying safe. Thanks so much for checking out the channel here today. If it's your first time stumbling along, maybe you did a little research on the Brothers Destruction documentary, wanted to hear someone sit down and break it down for you, well, you came to the right place. Make sure you leave a big thumbs up and subscribe so you get updates just like this one into your inbox pretty much right away. Alright, so the Brothers of Destruction documentary, bittersweet only because we're getting to the end of the 30 Days of the Dead Man. I've loved this, man. This has been great, going back and really reliving some of the Undertaker's greatest moments throughout his entire career. And in many ways, the Undertaker has really been kind of that thing for me as a wrestling fan to get me through this pandemic era. I can't lie, I'm not a huge fan of not having shows without fans. It takes some getting used to. I think I've gotten a little better with it. But I think the Undertaker, through the Last Ride documentary, through these documentaries that have been on the 30 Days of the Dead Man, that's really kind of kept me going here. And I'm excited for Sunday, the final farewell of the Undertaker. Almost 30 years, 30 freaking years, pretty much my entire life has been, is coming to an end, coming to a conclusion this Sunday, and WWE has done a great job in really kind of doing whatever they can, despite the circumstances, to build up really good tribute and to provide you with so much content. They must realize that, Undertaker's retirement's a really big deal for fans, and they're getting as absolute much out of this as they possibly can. I mean, how about the Dead Man dropping, charging $1,000 for a cameo for 30 special ones this Sunday at Survivor Series? Just unbelievable. And, as far as this documentary goes, this was one that I was really excited about when I first heard about it. For those who don't know, this documentary was actually at the Houston Film Festival and debuted on October 29th, the final day of the festival. So going into this, I was amped. I was like, this is the one I want to see. This is one that's, tippy top of the list. Love Paul Bear, but this is on the tippy top of the list. I want to see, this is going to be like a full-length, hour and a half. It's going to be like Class Action Park. If you don't know what that is, make sure you go out of your way to check that one out too. But I thought this was going to be like an hour and a half to 2 hours, similar to the CM Punk documentary, which also had some showings in some films, some showings in some theaters in Chicago. I thought this was going to be a solid hour and a half to 2 hour piece, really just breaking down the entire 23-year rivalry between The Undertaker and Kane. And that's not what this was. Unfortunately, it is about 47 minutes. Many of these documentaries on WWE Network are a little shorter. I think the reason for that is because I think they hope to repurpose much of this material to be utilized on television. The Last Ride itself, with that documentary, one of the episodes of that was on after NXT this week, so it makes sense and I get it, but from somebody who was ready to sit down for an hour and a half, now less is not always more. I was ready for an hour and a half, 2 hour documentary, and because 23 years, I mean, these guys have been through so much together that I think you could have got so much more out of it. That said, for what it was, for those 47 minutes, it was fantastic. It was just so great to see The Undertaker and Kane finally able to kind of take down that kayfabe, mask, so to speak, and be able to shoot the breeze, as Glenn and Mark. And it was really interesting because, from a fan's perspective, it was like you sat down and you watched these two best friends who hadn't seen each other in a while just be able to kind of catch up. I mean, they show Undertaker, they show Kane, both coming together in their little vehicles, getting ready to come and be in this empty theater, sit apart, of course, socially distant, and talk about their careers, which I thought was really, really a lot of fun. And they start right in the beginning. And I'm not going to give you the whole breakdown. No, that's not what I do. I'll give you some of my favorite parts. But, they started right in the beginning, showing some of the stuff of Kane as Unabomb in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And I hadn't realized, I knew about the Smoky Mountain WWE relationship because obviously there's, many times in 1993, I think 93 Survivor Series, there's a random Rock and Roll Express match. And that's because of that relationship between Smoky Mountain Wrestling and WWE. So I knew about that. But I hadn't realized that WWE was sending The Undertaker down there to do some shows. And so they show Undertaker and Kane, one of their first meetings. Kane as Unabomb, who looks just awesome. I mean, he's pretty much got a version of the Kane mask on. He just looks like a total badass back in the summer of '95. And they show Undertaker and Kane going down there, Undertaker and Kane joking about how they sold the building out. And it was competing in a sellout, which I thought was really funny. And then they show, obviously, not too much prior stuff to WWE, but they eventually show how Kane does come over to WWE, and Undertaker was joking and saying, he thought really highly of Kane because he had passed the sniff test of being big and being able to chew bubblegum at the same time. If you remember at the time, pretty much every big man who was coming into WWE was coming into WWE and pretty much being programmed with The Undertaker. Giant Gonzalez, way past his prime King Kong Bundy in '95. so many guys that would come in there through the years and face Undertaker. So Undertaker was excited that he finally had a big guy that he knew could work, and he really enjoyed that. Obviously, we know that didn't exactly start out that way for Kane. He comes into WWE as Isaac Yankem DDS, and Undertaker told a really funny story about, he asked Kane, he was like, did you mention that maybe you went to dental school or you were a fan of dentists or something to that extent in your pre-screen interview with Vince McMahon? Because that's typically what Vince would grasp onto and then develop the character from there. Undertaker said, when he went to go meet Vince for the first time, he let it slip that he liked to sing in the shower, and he was a good singer in the shower. And then right as he let it slip, he kind of was like, oh God, why did I do that? Because he knew that at that moment, maybe he'd have some sort of silly character that Vince McMahon would kind of latch onto. So thankfully that didn't happen, or I don't think 30 years from now we'd be talking about the singing Undertaker. From there, they obviously talked about Kane's run as Isaac Yankem, and Undertaker was saying, he really went to Vince and said, are you sure you want to blow this guy as an evil dentist? Like, he could really be something for us. He can really go. And Vince McMahon turned around and said, no, he's creeping like a dentist. And so they were able to kind of create that Isaac Yankem character for Kane. Obviously, it didn't work out. They completely gloss over Fake Diesel. Fake Diesel gets no love in here whatsoever. I don't know if it's because it was just too close to the Kane character. Obviously, Fake Diesel's there till beginning of '97 when Kane debuts. Then they show some really interesting stuff of Kane actually going and doing like training vignettes so he could learn the Undertaker's moves in like a random shed ring that was set up in this shed for Kane to go in there and learn all the moves of the Undertaker. They show him practicing the sit-up, practicing the tombstone. That type of stuff is like the amount of stuff WWE must have that is just waiting to be unearthed in their vault is just endless, I'm sure. Really great stuff there. Then they show, obviously, Bad Blood 97. Kane makes his debut. He just runs through everyone. Talks about 97 being just this, like, absolute pinnacle for him because he was just running through everyone. And they eventually talk about, that creation of the Kane character. Undertaker mentions how when he first heard about Kane, they actually show how when Undertaker first came in, he was being announced as Kane the Undertaker. So Undertaker was like, oh man, maybe the reason why I was using that name was because it was in tribute to my brother who I thought had passed away. And the wheels start taking motion there for Undertaker. And they talk about how when Kane first came in, he was really there as a placeholder. He was really there because they just needed an opponent for Undertaker for like a one-off type show. And it ended up where they were just hoping he'd get like a match or two out of him and then move on to a bigger program. But, as it turns out, people just loved it. They ate it up so much. And they talk about, in the beginning, and one of my favorite stories, probably the entire documentary, was when they talk about some of their ins and outs of the rivalry itself. They go into, the Flames being way bigger than originally planned at Royal Rumble 98 when Kane sets Taker's casket on fire. They talk about some of the different pieces that go into the early rivalry, and Kane mentions how when he had to slap Undertaker in the face, he was really nervous about it. And it makes a certain amount of sense. I mean, you think about the fact that Undertaker's been there since 1990. Kane's probably looked up to this guy to a certain degree as he's starting to morph into his own career as a pro wrestler. So now he's got to slap Undertaker as hard as possible. And he said at the end of the day, he was nervous about it. So backstage, he told Undertaker, like, I don't want to slap you, man. You're the Undertaker. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. So Undertaker just whines back and slaps the crap out of Kane. And Kane said it hurt so bad he couldn't wait to give him a receipt when they got in the ring. And he did just that. So he gave him a big slap there. So really interesting stuff. I thought that was just fantastic and really great. And they go through some of their stuff, into their rivalry, which eventually leads to the creation of the Brothers of Destruction. Because if you remember, Kane wins the world title and only has it for one day. And they get into that. They talk about, when Kane won the world title and the next night he lost to Austin. That match with Austin was so great that even in defeat, it really kind of put Kane to the next level. Because Kane, even though he was awesome and running through people, didn't win all that many matches in the beginning. He loses to, he ran through everyone in 97, but in 98, he loses to Undertaker at WrestleMania, but you forget that because he kicked out of 3 tombstones, which was like unheard of at the time. They mentioned that in this documentary. Then he goes and he fights Austin and loses the title the next night after winning it. But again, it's like he was going toe to toe with Austin. That was like one of the top matches in Raw history, certainly at that point. So Kane's a made man already. And what's really cool about this was not only was Kane saying and giving Undertaker kudos, but Undertaker was saying, I'm not sure what my career would be without Kane. So it was nice to see Undertaker kind of paying it forward to Kane. I love that. I thought that was really, really nice. And they go through the Brothers of Destruction. They don't talk too much about it. We don't get a recount. I wanted a recount of their rivalry with Chronic. I wanted a recount of their rivalry with Canyon and DDP. But no, we don't. But we do get a really funny funny recall of their match with Kai and Tai. This is kind of a bit of a hidden gem. If you've never seen Undertaker and Kane versus Kai and Tai, go out of your way to find this. I think it took place on a SmackDown, and basically what it legitimately is Kane, and he talks about it, he tried to do the last ride, and he gets up the guy to do the last ride, and Kaka goes right over his shoulders, and Undertaker sees this, he's like, what are you doing? That's how you do it. And Undertaker literally shows him how to do this with Kai and Tai, and they're just going back and forth, just hitting the last rides all on Kai and Tai, and they mention how, they were so great and so small that they could pretty much do anything they could to these two guys. They mention how eventually the Brothers of Destruction had to break up because there just wasn't anyone there that, you could only do so much with them. And it's true in a way. These guys really were, you never expected Undertaker and Kane to lose. They came across as just such badass dudes who were just destroying everyone in their path, and I think that's why the Brothers of Destruction, and they mentioned it, that's why the Brothers of Destruction didn't last longer in WWE as a team. There was only just so much you could do with them. So they talk about how they've split up. When it comes to Kane unmasking, he actually asks Undertaker, and it was really interesting even prior to that, just to circle back. I've become a circle back guy during the pandemic. But just to circle back, Kane even talks about how during his time in WWE, he kind of went in a bit of a lull. He felt like maybe he wasn't getting as much out of his run as he wanted to, and they show him getting a little bored. And I'll be honest, Kane's a guy. I know people love Kane, and this might be an opinion that people don't love, but for a while, I was pretty bored of Kane's character. I felt like he was just kind of going through the motions, wasn't doing too much creatively with that character. So when he took off his mask, that was a huge deal. And that was like major stuff. And Kane asked Undertaker what he thought about that. And Undertaker said, in the beginning he had some reservations because the idea was Kane was burnt. So they were like, how can you do this? The guy's obviously not going to be burnt in real life. And so that really was something that they kind of had to go around there. But Kane mentions how he changed his entire character up entirely from someone who had been physically burnt to mentally burnt. Because clearly there was nothing wrong with him, but he thought there was. And so they show that he went from the guy, I'm sucking, over to this monster who instead now is, there's something not right with him. He's unstable, and he even became more unstoppable in that sense as maskless Kane. So I thought that was really, really cool. Undertaker, in the meantime, they talk about how Undertaker starts to retire the badass character. You can tell Undertaker's favorite version of the Undertaker is the American Badass. He loves just being himself. And you watch the Last Ride DVD that came out back in 2001, and the Undertaker is really just himself. He is the exact same guy now as he was back then, a little older now, but he really is. He just absolutely loves being himself on television. And I think that it had to be exhausting to constantly be the dead man. So I think it was a little sad to see the badass character go. But he talks about, eventually going into that. They don't talk too much about WrestleMania 20. I don't know if it was because you got a lot of that on the Paul Bear documentary. It seems like that's pretty glossed over, as is pretty much now the remainder of Undertaker and Kane's run. They talk about how Kane beat Undertaker 3 times, but it's just kind of briefly mentioned. They don't go through the 2010 run. They don't go through Kane's second world title run. None of that. They kind of just speed right up. But it does lead to the most interesting tidbit on this entire documentary, and it has nothing to do with The Undertaker and Kane. They get to WrestleMania 30, where Kane actually asks The Undertaker about the streak and if Undertaker thought they should have ended it. And this is the first time, to my knowledge, that they've ever acknowledged that Undertaker was supposed to win that match the entire day leading up to the match. And at the end of the day, right before the match, Vince McMahon came over to Undertaker and said, I changed my mind. I'd like you to lose to Brock. And Undertaker says he was very surprised by it. He didn't think Brock needed it. I completely disagree, because I think they totally botched the first year of Brock Lesnar's return to WWE, and I think him defeating The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30 just skyrocketed him to the next level and made him the big deal in WWE that has made so many characters. But another argument for another time. Undertaker, and it talks about how he would have liked to give this to Roman Reigns, and thought about what a big deal this could have been for Roman, and really pushed Roman over to be that next guy. So I thought that was just really interesting stuff. And the documentary obviously ends with the two of them talking about their match with DX and some of the trials and tribulations that came along with that. But Go out of your way to check this out. So much fun. The Brothers of Destruction. So cool to see these guys just being dudes. Like, I just love seeing them be able to kind of let the guard down, let us in for a bit. And again, I mean, this was really like two friends catching up, and we got to be a fly on the wall and watch them sit down and just chat about their careers and tell stories. Like, I think that's what they said. They just love telling stories. So I really enjoyed the documentary. I wish it could have been just a little bit longer. It could have got a little more detail, but I got a kick out of this. Let me know what you guys thought about it in the comments section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.